Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of BIM Pure Live. I am your host, Nicolas Catelier. I'm an architect, a BIM specialist, and the founder of BIM Pure. We've got a great episode for you tonight. If you are watching live today, September 25th at 8 p.m. Eastern, you can type it in the chat where you are watching from. And so meanwhile, I'll be give a shout out to our sponsor. The sponsor of this season of BIM Pure Live and this episode is Guardian. Guardian is a plugin to help you manage your Revit workflows and standards. Let me roll the video. And we've prepared a series. It's the tip of the week for Guardian. And the tip that we'll be sharing this week is the new messages feature that is integrated within Guardian. So this is a new message to allow you to send a message to your entire team that is working directly in Revit. You can send to the project, a single project, to a group of projects that you can predetermine, or you can send to the entire company, everyone working inside any Revit project in your company. It includes a rich text editor. That means that you can easily change the text, make it bold, make it italic, change the font, make it smaller, make it bigger. You can even play with the color to highlight some parts of it, and you can include hyperlinks. So for example, if you want to send a message to upgrade to the latest version of Revit, you can include a link to that, or you can include a link to your internal database for training purpose. You can add images and memes to make your message punch a bit more. You can send an expiration date for your message, and then you can preview it. And this is the kind of thing you're gonna get. And then you can click on send, and all people that you've pre-selected, so the project, the group of project, or a company are going to receive it. And as an admin, you can track all the messages you've sent. You can edit the message, you can send it again, or you can delete the message and review it again if you aren't sure what you've sent. And now let's move to the user side. This is what the users will see if they open a Revit project where a message has been sent. It will say that you got new mail directly inside of Revit, and you can access the message. And if it's past the expiration date, it's going to be removed. So that is Enscape. Thanks a lot to Enscape for sponsoring this season of BIM Pure Live. And that's only one of the multiple features included within Enscape. So check out the link in the description to learn more about them to help you manage your Revit workflows and standards. All right, what else do we got? Next week episode, no, it's not next week. In fact, it's in 2 weeks from now at 3 p.m. Eastern. So what date is that exactly? That is October 9th at 3 p.m. Eastern with Michael Kilkelly. It's the second time that Michael comes to the live show. Last time he came in to talk about Revit add-ins using C#. It turns out to be one of the most popular episode that we've ever done. So he's coming back this time, and it's going to be about AI, how you can use AI for your Revit add-ins. So using ChatGPT to help you code. That's one of the best use cases of AI, in my opinion. So we're going to talk about that. It should be fascinating. So again, this will be on October 9th at 3 p.m. Eastern. A couple more things to mention and announce before we move on to the guest. The BIM Pure membership. So in February, we've launched a new membership that includes a collection of Revit courses, downloads, live masterclass. We have collections of doors, the pro template, our pamphlet collections, and we've also worked with other experts in the BIM and AEC tech realm. For example, Nehama, we've created a course about landscape, a recent one with Eric Fritz, where he shows you how to develop custom Revit toolbar using the Python language and PyRevit. It includes a bunch of downloads and live master classes. So a bit similar to the live format we are doing on YouTube, but a bit more intimate, where you can ask questions. And sometimes it's I am hosting the sessions by myself. Sometimes I have guests coming on. And you can see we have 2 upcoming live sessions for now. So if you're interested in joining the membership, head on over to bimpure.com and you'll find all the information you need. And yeah, what else do I have to talk about? Yeah, and we've started doing, for every single live episode we're doing, we have on the blog. So if you go to the blog, you get all the information, and we are adding the links. So we'll be mentioning a couple of links during this live session. So head on over to the blog, and all the links are there. And if we talk about some stuff during the show, I'll try to add them later on. Okay, that's all I have to mention. Let's have a look. Like, it's a different time zone than we typically do. Our European friends are sleeping right now, I would guess. We have George from Texas. We have someone from Kobe, Japan. And we've got somebody else from Australia, Carlos from Perth. And we've got WZ from New Jersey. All right, so let's introduce the guest. Today's guest is Paul Wintour. Paul is currently based in Sydney, Australia. He's the founder of Parametric Monkey that he started in 2015. It started as a blog, and he moved full-time as a consultancy in 2018. Before that, Paul worked at BVN Architecture as a senior associate, and before he also worked at HOK and Woods Bagot. Let me welcome to the show, Paul.
Hi, Nicholas. Thanks for having me.
How are you doing?
Yeah, really well.
All right, so I know that it's like mid-morning for you, but here it's kind of rare these days. I have an evening session, so I'll just open my beer and say cheers to all of you watching live. Pretty happy. I was waiting for this moment. Okay, so tell me, how did you get interested in BIM?
Well, yeah, a bit of a long story, but I graduated from a pretty standard sort of university where it was sort of very technical based. I think we did maybe one semester of CAD, and that was about it. And I had a pretty good job, working as a architectural assistant. And then I moved overseas to the Netherlands, and I was surrounded by all these kind of interns on their Erasmus sort of trip, and I sort of saw the skills that were coming out, and I said, oh man, I've just graduated and I'm already sort of redundant. So you hang around people from your OMA, and 3D Max was kind of really sort of popular. So yeah, I started to when I moved to London, HOK were an early adopters of Revit, so I got introduced to that, and then shortly after I went back and did a postgraduate master's at the Architectural Association. Really, yeah, advanced digital workflows and computation, and tried to, I guess, catch up to some of those new graduates.
Yeah, and how did Parametric Monkey got started? So you told me at first it was a blog, and it eventually turned into a consultancy. Can you tell me the story?
Yeah, so I worked with HOK in London, and then years later I took the sort of I was called a building smart manager at the time in Hong Kong. So I was a bit reluctant to kind of move into that kind of design technology field, but I took the role, and I was working across multiple projects. And because it's sort of China, there's some pretty funky forms, and so I started to document the workflows purely for my own benefit, so that I didn't forget, this is what you need to do first. This worked, this didn't. And so then I started to share those workflows. And yeah, people kind of seemed to enjoy it. So I started sharing more. And yeah, it's 9 years down the track now, I guess.
Yeah, that's yeah. As I've told you before the show, it's a similar story with Revit Pure. In fact, I started just as a side project and eventually turned on into a full-time thing after a few years. So, and how was the move made that you decided, okay, now I'm ready to move into my own Parametric Monkey is going to become a consulting firm? How did that happen?
Yeah, so so after about 10 years abroad, I moved back and ended up going into Sydney. and was working, sort of full time doing computational design, um, and I guess sort of BIM, and I guess I was getting frustrated with, um, trying to change, offices, the culture of,
Hmm.
different offices, and it kind of dawned on me that sometimes it's easier to change things from the outside than it is from the inside. Um, and so yeah, I made the decision to kind of move into consultancy. And then the first client was actually my old work. So
Yeah, yeah, that
it's
can
kind of,
happen, right?
really, really kind of strange. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm a big follower of your work with the blog and your post. I always enjoy reading them because there's honesty, and let's put it frankly, on LinkedIn especially, there's a lot of overhype. Everything is the most amazing, the most brilliant thing ever, right? So it's nice to see some nuance and an emphasis on the hard work where the innovation
Mhm.
actually comes from. So there's so much we can uh, talk about. I'm not even sure where to start. Uh, Maybe with this one, it's let me, yeah, you won't see it on your screen. Let me just yeah, okay, so people can see that's one of your LinkedIn posts that was from 6 months ago, where you said the AC industry doesn't need AI, it doesn't need
Yeah.
digital transformation, it doesn't need innovation. What it needs is honesty. And you went out, so I won't read the entire post, but
Mhm.
can you tell me what inspired you to write this? Because it really resonated. It got quite a lot of reaction.
Yeah. So I'd just been to an Autodesk um, event, and I was well, not on stage, but listening to sort of the keynote, and they were talking about, the industry is converging, architecture, manufacturing converging, and this is the future. Um, and then they showed this slide about, well, this is our cloud solution for AEC, and this is our cloud solution for manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went, split up into the classes, and there was two streams, and there was the AEC in the big room, and then there was a very small room for manufacturing. And so, the narrative didn't align, and it just after that event, I kind of wrote it, um, and it seemed to be. I didn't know if it was bitter, and it sat in my kind of notes for about 6 months whether I was going to publish it or not.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there's just, yeah, a lot of what I was seeing, a lot of disconnect between what was being said and what is being done, and that happens everywhere, right? Whether it's not just in architecture, it's society in general. But um, another topic was, I think, the whole gender equality in architecture,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of companies saying how great they are and doing events and education, um, but then when the results come out, there's still a 20% pay gap and things
Yeah.
like that. So
Mm-hmm.
there is a lot of talk, but they don't always align with what's being done.
Yeah, so for those who want to read the full post, I've I did a link to the show notes. So on that topic, can you explain what is innovation theater? So I've heard you mention that a couple of times. Where did you first hear about that concept?
Yeah, I mean it's a term I borrowed from a Steve Blank. I think he's Silicon Valley based. I can't remember exactly where he's from, but um, it kind of it's somewhat self-explanatory where you know people pretend to do innovation rather than actually doing innovation. So a great example is we were talking about the Built conference before, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It's a
yeah.
kind of a user event, and I can't count the number of times where I've seen a presentation and they show what their company is doing. And then after hours, you're having a beer and you're like, man, my company's broken. They won't let me do this, and I've got resistance. And so companies are doing stuff, but it might just be one person in the corner in their spare time. It's not the whole company is on board and has support. So it's really just, I guess maybe, yeah, it's not necessarily a lie, but it's not necessarily the whole truth about how it's happening.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that some presentation that seems all wonderful and all rosy, but when you talk to person, you see, okay, actually, the real way we're doing it for it to work is this and that. So yeah, there can be a disconnect sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay, another thing that I really wanted to talk about, I'll briefly show it on the screen for people. It's an article that you wrote. When was that? In May 2022. Technical debt, architecture's ticking time bomb, and actually sent to many clients this article because everything you wrote about that resonated so much with me. So basically, the key point is that sometimes you cut corners. Let's say that we're taking the example of a Revit model, and you have deliverables. You need to deliver a set of a plan of PDFs. So, like, to save some time to get deliverables ready, you starting to cut some corners. So maybe the quality of the model goes out of the window a little bit, and then it kind of turns into a bad cycle. And you also talk about how employees go into it, and now it just creates that spiral for a project. So what inspired you to write this article in the first place?
I mean, I've experienced it. I think
Yeah.
everyone has either experienced it or been in a organization where it's happened. And everyone knows the project that they're talking about. I think I call it like, it's a bit like Voldemort. You can't say the name. It's so, but I was also doing strategic consultancy with organizations. So you kind of go through a series of interviews with people, and so you start to, I guess, yeah, see their dirty laundry and what's happening. And it's it starts with management saying, just get it done, right? Just get it out the door. We've got this deliverable. And I was thinking of an analogy just before we came on, and it's a bit like a coach in a sporting team just saying, go win, and giving no instructions or coaching about it. And so what happens is, people tend to cut corners, and it gets them through that deadline. But then it becomes a bit like negative compound interest. And you keep cutting more corners until, the project's really broken and no one wants to work on it. And so they hire new staff, and these new staff members come in all fresh-eyed, ready to go. They have no idea what they're getting themselves into. They jump on the project and then quickly realize, oh my God, what have I done? But the main issue is that there becomes a point in time where you can't go back, right? The damage is done. That you just got to kind of get through it. So if you wanted to hold people accountable, they've left the company. If you want to find out, if you want to fix it yourself, there's been so much attrition. You don't know why decisions were made, why they did it this way. Was it to cut corners, or was that a better way of doing it? So no one knows. And it just kind of like drifts along with this, rudderless ship. And it's really kind of problematic. And often, it's blamed on, oh, we don't have enough digital skills, or, the BIM manager wasn't hands-on enough. But the whole premise of that article was actually, well, it's management's duty, that it's okay to cut corners, but you need to sort of keep a ledger of that and say, all right, a bit like a budget. We've overspent this week. We're going to have to make up for it next week.
So you mean like if you have a Revit model and you kind of cut corner for the sake of the deliverables, let's say it's a set of PDF, you just put it somewhere. Hey, we have to go back and kind of redo this part of the model.
Yeah. So, I'm a big fan of, Trello or, something
Mm-hmm.
like that, where you're
Yeah.
actually documenting the decision process and what's outstanding and say, look, I did this, we can get it out, but I'm going to need 3 hours, 5 hours, whatever on Monday to kind of fix it up. Because if we don't, it's going to accumulate. Um,
Yeah, keeping a ledger. I like this idea because what I see sometimes, like in the article, yeah, and what you say, it's like that one project, but I also see it's on a little bit on all projects, right? There's a little bit of depth in all projects. Some are worse than others, but yeah, it can become a dead spiral. I think to me, it's the moment that you don't trust the model anymore, right? That you like that ignore the model. You have go to the page to see the real information. That's where it's at, and that's when you enter a really dangerous zone. And yeah,
yeah, I mean, I've been, I think one example, I got onto a project and, you're trying to find something, or change the graphics, and you go through all of that list of, graphics overrides, hidden, is it a work set, whatever. Why isn't this? And you realize, oh, it's a field region. That's why things aren't
yeah.
kind of changing how they are. So I think there's obviously the textbook way and there's the quick and dirty way. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you need to do quick and dirty. But
Mm-hmm.
as long as everyone is aware of the consequences of that so that they can be managed going forward. Um,
Yeah, I like the idea of keeping a ledger of all these cut corners. And also, one of the most dangerous sentence that I hear in projects is we don't actually have to model this. I mean, yeah, it's true. Sometimes you don't have to go super accurate, but I see sometimes people might not have that much Revit experience or BIM experience. Like, just do it in T. Why would you need to model that? They would say it's not going to change anyway, right? That's decided. The client made his mind up. Just do it in 2D to save time. But as you know, the client always changes mind, and
yeah.
you end up reworking it anyway, right? Uh, and what's the solution to it? So one at the end of the article, you talk about the idea that it shouldn't be you should decentralize, have a decentralized approach where it's maybe not that one heroic person that's going to save the whole project, but it's more about having a cluster and different people. So tell me about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, from my experience, I've worked in a few different practices with different sort of, I guess, organizational structures. And um, a lot of practices often try to have, one big power user, hitter, they come in for the competition, smash it out, move on, and then, let, some recent grads or whatever take that project through. Um, and then you have sort of, a BIM manager that might run training once a week or once a month or, whatever that might be. Um, but often what you need to really pick up on these problems is someone to kind of sit near you. So, if you are on the project and you look over your shoulder. So one example I had was sitting next to an interior designer. She wasn't that strong in Revit, and she was complaining about populating a Revit schedule with all of the fields. And I said, you've got, Ideate Explorer. We can take this into Excel. We can drag and drop, how you. She's like, no. You show her, 10 minutes later, she's like, you changed my life. Like that's, I've just saved like an hour or two just today. But that wouldn't have happened unless you see it happen, or they feel enough, I guess, psychological safety to be able to ask questions and know that they'll get a response without, someone saying, oh, you need to be trained, sort of, or, you're going to get sent to the the naughty bin.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, that's what I've seen work really well is, one person per team, to kind of share their knowledge. And then, once they get good, then they can start sharing their knowledge, and it becomes this exponential growth of knowledge in a studio.
Yeah, yeah. I was actually inspired by that article, and I was working with a client a couple of years back, and we've experimented. Instead of naming a one BIM manager person, we've said find out 4 or 5 people in the team who are interested in such a role and give them responsibility. Like they are now the BIM coordinator and they're responsible for each little project. And I think it works well. And if else, if it's just that one user in the company, it's too much pressure on that person. And if that person leaves, you kind of really get in trouble, right? And yeah,
Yeah.
so
So I think, a different way of thinking about it is often, a BIM manager is placed on I mean, different different countries and organizations will use different terms, but, a BIM person on a project, and it's their responsibility to keep the model healthy. Whereas, I think a better solution is to say, well, actually, it's the whole team's
mm-hmm.
responsibility, but I'm going to be here to help you, to teach you, to enable you,
Yeah.
and also deliver stuff. Um, so it's a collective responsibility as opposed to, a single person. Um, but that obviously requires a personality of, someone who wants to share and, has some soft skills and can
Mm-hmm.
talk to people and resolve conflict, and not just, model families all day for their teammates.
Yeah, yeah. So I suppose since you've been working as a BIM consultant, you've seen how multiple firms work. And I don't know if you noticed the same thing as I did, but often problems that firms have, it's not the technical skills, it is human problems. So it's how
Yes.
the knowledge is shared, and it's how responsibilities are shared, and how, yeah, just communication problems mostly, and sometimes resistance to change, of course. And so
Yeah.
you
I
have,
mean,
I almost had to think about, it's almost a psychological job. Like, how can you get people to share more, to communicate more, and ensure they're all on the same page instead of fighting?
yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's hard because if someone, the analogy I use, it's a bit like, if you go to the physiotherapist, right? You've injured yourself, and what you want is a massage, or, some electrodes, and just to kind of, them to fix you. But often what they will give you is a bunch of exercises to strengthen and enable you to heal yourself. And I think as a, consultant, it's a bit like that, where someone says, okay, well, tell me, what software should we be using? What should we buy?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is it this? You're like, yes, you can use that, but
Mm-hmm.
your issues are much deeper, than just software issues. So I can sell you software. I can, tell you what to buy, but in 6 months, 12 months time, you're going to have the same issues. So unless you can get to the bottom of those, and they are mostly soft skills, and priorities and alignment issues, you're going to have the same issues as before.
Yeah. So you gotta solve your soft skills problems to make BIM work in your firm. All right. So that was the technical data. I encourage everyone to read it. I've added the article link. Uh, what else did we have? I mean, there's so many interesting articles. So I
Where do
know
we
you have
begin?
a few slides prepared, and I really wanted to talk about the modular industry as well. So I don't know if you have some stuff
Okay.
prepared in the slides, or also the mass timber automation that you did. That's super interesting. So maybe I'll move around so we can see your screen, and yeah,
Yeah. So,
let's move there.
yeah. So I guess with modular, I guess it's been my latest focus, and the coming back to that whole kind of honesty sort of conversation, I think there was a lot of hijacked conversations that were happening around modular. It started off as a bit of being curious and say, okay, well, it promises so much, like what's happening to it. And there was a lot of claims that were kind of being made that just weren't substantiated. There was one about embodied carbon being, 45% less. There was no references, no documentation, no.
Yeah, there are no proof of that. I don't know.
There was they didn't even say like what life cycle analysis stages were calculated, what it was benchmarked against. And so a lot of that conversation is kind of hidden around, well, this is proprietary. We've got a patented system and, we can't tell you. And so, I started to take an interest in it and really wanted to explore both the business model and the implications for architects. So I don't know if the screen's visible, but this is some of the work that I've just sort of presented at Built conference like 2 weeks ago. And I was really sort of saying, well, okay, this is sort of traditional construction where we say, I call it kind of BIMtopia, where we say, all right, we do a Revit model, a BIM model, whatever. It's often to LOD 300. We extract tender drawings, and then we hand it over to a manufacturer to fabricate from, and then they build from. And the things that I've seen, so I spend probably just as much time on the manufacturing side of things, is that a lot of those BIM models are pretty useless to fabricate from. It's often, it's not an evolution of the model, but it's often starting again in a completely different software for fabrication tolerances. And then you still got this issue of, well, we're still manually building stuff. So you can have this perfect digital workflow, but in the end, we've still got this kind of old way of building things. And I think we get lost a bit in that, well, what's the end goal? Is BIM about doing something digital, or is it about getting a better built outcome? And so a lot of the criticisms I've had around sort of modular is less around the I guess industrialized or manufacturing side of things, but more about the business model associated with that. So down the bottom we've got traditional construction. Everything's bespoke, it's built on site, it's manual labor, and modular is the polar opposite. Standardized, built in a factory. It's often proprietary software or plugins. Both are problematic. So modular's had lots of failure. Traditional, just as many failures and problematic, but it is somewhat more resilient in that you can pivot or scale up, scale down quite easy. And so what we're starting to see now, and it's kind of a really exciting time, is a lot of companies are exploring that space in between. So it's things like mass customization and digital fabrication and things like that. So it's the workflow is changing quite a bit, where something for like a digital fabrication workflow, you're actually fabricating from that model, file to factory fabrication. And we sort of eliminate design intent. I think that's, I don't know if you've come across this, but, an architect will take it to LOD 300 and say, this is what it needs to look like. Now you make it work. And Whereas digital fabrication is basically saying, okay, well, what you model is what you're going to get. There's no reinterpretation of it. So pretty much all of our projects are using, digital fabrication in some capacity. So it has a lot of those benefits that modular are arguing for. So, fabricated offsite, it's manufactured, it's precision tolerance, and so this is one of the projects worked on. It was actually completed 4 or 5 years ago now, but UTS is the University of Technology in Sydney, and this was their new library. It's kind of their, I guess, central building. And so there's this big reading room, and we worked on the sun shading of that. So, highly detailed model. They're, say, more than LOD 400, because even LOD 400 is not necessarily fabrication from. So we partnered with Tilt Industrial Design, who are industrial designers. And, what's been interesting is actually when you work with someone outside of AEC who have manufacturing sort of knowledge, they bring a whole new expertise to how you do things. And so these louvers are actually motorized. They rotate to control the sun. So this was all set up parametrically. This is the surface model that we received. And then this is the fabrication model that we actually created. So you go from something that's single surface through to, material thickness, every rivet, every nut, every washer. But then you've also got, real world scenarios. So we did a 3D scan, and, the BIM model is actually way out from, well, maybe the other way around. What was built was way out from the BIM model. And so if you're doing manufacturing, you're at millimeter tolerances. And especially if it's non-orthogonal, that throws everything out. So, we had to set up a system that could accommodate that variability on site. Clash detection, it was all automated. We did, simulations of these louvers rotating. That was all exported in tabular format with conditional formatting. So it wasn't, 100 Revisto, issues assigned to different people, but you could actually go through and then, evaluate the severity of those. Were they just touching, or were they fully, bumping into each other? We did.
So sorry to interrupt, but what software were you using in that?
So this was all done in Grasshopper, Grasshopper and Rhino. Mm-hmm. This is just exported into Excel, but it was, cladding to beam, or beam to louver, or, whatever that might be. It'd be same in sort of Navisworks, where you set up different packages and run those clashes. We're looking at, things like K-factor. So, one of the things I've realized is that every model is wrong. It's just a matter of how wrong it is, or how incorrect it is. So, this is sheet metal we were using. So it expands and contracts depending on how you build it. But all of that shop drawing process was automated, dimensioned. Like, you didn't have, once the model was done, the documentation was done. There was no separate process or team that documented this.
So do you think that in the future an architect could help with that, if they have access to some good automation tool, and we would skip a part of the project?
Yeah, like so I think
in the slides.
So I think as an industry, all of our focus has been on documentation. if you look at Dynamo or plugins, it's all about renumbering rooms or renumbering, elements, putting things on correct work sets. None of that actually really, it makes for better documentation. It doesn't necessarily make for a better building outcome. And I think, in some ways, BIM has failed us in that sense, where we've got less clashes, we've got better, well-documented buildings, but are we actually getting better buildings? And so I think, some of the criticisms of even the people that invented, I guess, BIM, people like Robert Aish and stuff who were at Foster's and have made similar kind of observations. So I think in some ways Revit and other BIM software is holding us back from realizing what it could be. I'm obviously into the computational design and the automation side of things. And I think, with the right sort of designs that can happen. But it's very different to kind of how we currently do things.
All right. And what are we seeing right now on your slide?
Yeah. So, I mean, these are, I spoke about file to factory. One of the things I kind of learned was what you draw is not necessarily what needs to be drawn. So it sounds odd, I know, counterintuitive, but they had thousands of these pieces, and you notice that they actually haven't cut them through. I think a couple fell through by accident, but they actually deliberately stopped that water jet cutter slightly before, so that they didn't have 1,000 pieces that someone on site had to go through. But that whole DfMA, design for fabrication and assembly. Sorry, you can probably hear that. Someone's decided to do construction.
Oh no, I didn't really hear it.
Okay, good. So building in that intelligence into how you do it. So these louvers actually had these grooves in them, so you don't actually need to document the thickness of that. You just need the center line, and then they have a drill bit that's going to extrude it. But if you stop the center line at the perimeter, you actually get this really problematic area. And so you actually need to modify your documentation to build in all of these manufacturing logic. So there's really loud noises coming out. So these pieces, another example is we had these two pieces had to be welded together. And when they did the prototype, the guy doing it wasn't very diligent, and it wasn't kind of aligned. And so, when we unfolded this, we actually created these notches to say, purely this is where you start and this is where you stop when you're welding, just so that you get a nice, cleaner, better outcome. So embedding all of that manufacturing logic into your kind of design. So this was kind of a really, I guess, successful outcome. This was the commissioning of the louvers, the final building, and this is, from the inside. So, really kind of beautiful, architecturally, I guess, designed sort of space. Do you want to go through some of the mass? I know you're dying for the mass timber.
Yeah, because as I've told you before the show, I've also been playing with working with the wood industry a lot, trying to see how BIM can be helpful for them and how to link the work of a manufacturer to the work of an architect, and if BIM can somewhat link, do a link between the two. So we've been experimenting with that, creating BIM content. So I was curious to see what
Yeah.
you've come up with.
So, I mean, mass timbers, I guess, yeah, it's definitely the sort of flavor of the month. A lot of architects are looking at it, particularly around embodied carbon, and, as that's becoming more and more, important, and documenting that with architects declare and things like that. I'm interested in it not just for that, but also because it allows that mass customization DfMA workflow. It's like the stadium of computational design. It's a given that you can just automate it, and not necessarily a modular workflow or business model, but you can still do industrialized construction and mass customization and improve how we do things. So this was actually a research project. So there was a research grant, through the Australian government and also kind of the wood industry. And really, one of the obstacles they came across was that builders or contractors weren't using it, not necessarily because they didn't know how to use it, but because of the sequencing and the safety issues and how to actually assemble it with all of the legislation involved. And so this was looking at sequencing. How do you actually build this in a safe way with safety barriers and temporary props, and people screwing in nails? They need to have a safe platform to do that. And so we started off, so it was an animation, basically. We were working with a professor of construction who was doing all of the sequencing and time lapse. And I wanted to challenge myself, and I said, okay, we're going to do this animation in Revit. And so the first issue was, in Revit, columns are, designed to do this, right? They're constrained, and you can change the level, and they're going to flex and adapt. What they're not designed is to do this. And this is sort of the difference between, say, a BIM workflow and a, manufacturing workflow is, this needs to be an object that can move and freely rotate and things like that. So we did a crazy long dynamo graph. And I don't recommend this.
That's quite a crazy dynamo graph. Wow. That's for the animation?
Yeah. So this is
okay. Oh my God.
Look, put it this way, there are better tools for the job. This was really just stress testing and say, okay, well, how far can you go? I had one LinkedIn punter who didn't believe me that it was. But, you basically, like a choreograph this. So in what sequence do these need to be lifted? How high do they go? Where do they go? When do they rotate? It's like choreographing a ballet or a dance. And so that's what Dynamo was doing. And then we did, what's it called? The periodic run mode. So all of these, graphics, they're post-production, but the actual animation is in Revit. So these are Revit families that are moving in 3D space. Things like those temporary props, they're, a visibility parameter. We're turning them on and off. And, once we get to the end of these columns, we'll start to see these, CLT panels come in. So the purpose of these videos was to, have workshops with the contractors and say, look, this is how you would do it. These are the sequencing. This is where you'd put on the safety barriers. This is how people would access it. Do you see any problems? And they would go, yeah, we can't, have really heavy screw fixings from the bottom. They got to be from the top. So we had Rothoblast too as a partner who, kind of, gave input into how that. So these animations were done in Rhino using snapshots. And these are a much more, I guess, sort of, granular, construction sort of sequence, zooming in on things like that. So yes, animations can be done in Revit. I don't recommend it. But I think it's interesting that, this kind of logic is if you go down a DfMA route, a huge part of your contribution is how it's built, not what is built. So, as architects and engineers, we spend a lot of time maybe value engineering or changing the design to reduce costs. But actually, if we can think about how it's built and save on that installation time, you may not need to change the design, right? Like it may look the same, but if we think about how it's built, you may not, we can avoid rework that way. So if you've got algorithms or software that can actually do this as you're designing, then I think kind of more architects will get involved with, designing this way. So that's the dream. We'll see if it happens.
So what do you think of Revit as a tool for LOD 400 and more? Do you think it's a good idea, or how did it go to model these families with this level of accuracy?
So I think, I've written about this. I don't think it's often beneficial. In some cases, it's detrimental. So what tends to happen is a BIM manager will, get their standard BIM execution plan and just go, okay, LOD 400 for every trade.
Yeah.
I know in theory it's not an LOD 400 model, but people are kind of lazy or they don't know what the design is yet, so they just cover all bases. Okay. And so commercial realities, what I've seen happen is a contractor will say, okay, you need, manufacturer or subcontractor, you need to produce an LOD 400 model. And they go, yep. And so then they submit two prices. They'll go, here's one for BIM, and then it's an added expense, or here's the one, using CAD and shop drawing, process. And they go, all right, we'll take the lower figure. Or, it's done as a deliverable right at the end, right? They'll do their 2D and then hope by the very end that everyone's forgotten or, doesn't care about that model. So I think there are tricks into how these contracts are awarded because they're over specified. If they just sort of said, all right, LOD 350, then that's, less of a burden. But from the manufacturing side of things, I think most of these models cannot be manufactured from Revit. There are a few exceptions to that, maybe duct work or steel work, Teklas, you can use often the steel detailing. But if you talk to someone from mass timber, they draw it from scratch. If it's a facade contractor, they're going to be using a different profile, mullion, transom, different gaskets, all of that sort of stuff. It gets redesigned. Sheet metal, I just showed you, it needs to factor in K factor, which, Revit can't do. So, there are ways that you can obviously transfer that, to Inventor or other things. Um, but yeah, it's far from ideal.
Yes, it's something I've been playing with the wood industry that I'm working on. Actually, I'll be presenting with Eli Gold in 2 months from now in November. We'll be showing the works we did, but an hypothesis that we're testing, is it possible that the wood manufacturer in this case are trying to help the architects by either preparing some content families, or it could be automation as well. It could be a script or a plugin to help the architects make the model in a way that it can, when it's transferred to manufacturer, it's easier to um, modify to fit their needs. So it's still an experiment. We'll see how that goes. But that's one of the idea.
Yeah, I think even for, I know we're focusing a bit on mass timber, but it's the same sort of logic in that could you imagine an architect, drawing a floor plate with, 100 different individual families as a floor?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I
Mm-hmm.
think it's not something they're used to, but that's the sort of product manufacturing logic where each piece is an assembly, or its own individual element. It's not a system family in Revit that's just goes from inside to outside with no joints or step downs or things like that. So I think to move to this sort of manufacturing sort of workflow, you need the families, but actually, that was the next slide, which is really you need some sort of configurator or
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
plugin
right.
that actually does that for you. Um,
Yeah,
whether that's
there's
something,
like in the wood industry, there's AutoCAD, there's Struxoft, which can take a Revit wall and converts it
yeah,
to frame it all and do the shop drawings. And I know some firms here are using it with some good success. So where the question is, can we push that for more aspects of a building where you can have a lower LOD from an architect, but it would be relatively easy with automation to turn it into something that can be manufactured?
yeah. So it's I started to dig into this, and it's HSB CAD. I think they use a lot, and it's basically an AutoCAD plugin.
Yeah,
And so
I know it. I know this one.
that's the sort of that's where we're at with that sort of automation, right? It's going back to basics. Things like Katia can handle it. It's all very, it's super expensive for, I guess, the AEC industry in general. But yeah, you know, having a workflow or a technology that actually works with how you design. So yes, you can create a lot of families, but will an architect actually use that? Or,
Mm-hmm.
do what we, is it what we need? Some sort of algorithm, a plugin, separate software that will actually populate those families for you. Um, and then what happens when the design changes, right? Because,
Mm-hmm.
how do you recreate all of that information real quick? Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's that's a challenge for sure. Yeah. Yeah, generating the wall framing is easy. Rendering it, well, it can work, but that's often when you start having all sorts of issues.
Yeah. So I think, I'm really interested in trying to bring that information upstream to the architect. They may not use it, right? But at least it's giving you feedback about how it's actually working, and that's kind of implications around embodied carbon and the construction sequencing and things like that. I think we need to move away from this. I'm going to design it, and then someone else is going to build it, and I don't care how they do it as long as it looks the same. I think that causes a lot of problems, and we need to kind of move away from that as an industry.
For sure, I think you also, and so I was scrolling and browsing today to all of the blog posts you wrote, and one of them was about the new BIM 2.0, and it's a little bit what you're talking about, right? That the old BIM, Yes, it solved some problem. Yes, it gave us a coordinate sets of drawing. That's great, right? It's better than CAD, but it's still, I think on my side, it's a lot to manage, right, to get there. And it's, we like the buildings themselves don't actually see the value. And as you say, like there's like the link between the design and the construction is still not quite there. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So
what is your vision for the new BIM?
yeah. So um, I've got some sides I'll show in a minute. So I
Okay.
think the so right at the beginning we spoke about convergence, right? So I think um, BIM 2.0 is really the culmination of that convergence. So that's GIS information into BIM or into the design, but also the construction side of things. So there's a whole bunch of data that exists out there that we're not actually consuming. Um, and it's not smart. So if you think about, say, Revit, a building doesn't actually know it's a building. It's a model. Okay, so you go into maybe the site model and you can move that model, but it doesn't know that it's a building. It doesn't, you know, like Ladybug, for example, they've gone to enormous trouble to do a plugin that will take your Revit model and create the analytical model.
Mm-hmm.
So, amazing work, but simple things like making the model simpler is really, really hard. If you have an LOD 400 model, but you just want to see the massing or the analytical of those spaces, you can't do it. Um, we don't embrace GIS data, so it doesn't it doesn't know kind of where it is on Earth or what its relationships are. So that kind of BIM 2.0, is kind of work that I've been doing with a metric monkey, and it's the beginning of it was saying, well, can we bring in all of this contextual data? So can we bring in all of the planning data sets? Can we bring in the topography? And then, from the city model, can we actually generate the maximum building envelope? So that building then knows what its street frontage is, what its maximum building envelope is, what its floor space ratio is, its maximum height, all of that information. And these are, there's a concept in GIS, but it's a layer intersection. So different government agencies publish different data sets and their overlays. It's not one data set with the lot on it with everything embedded into it. So when you compress all this into one, these then become smart elements. So you can, everything about a single lot. And once you do that, you can start to then, bring in all of that manufacturing logic and say, well, let's do some what if scenarios and say, all right, using concrete, this is our embodied carbon. This is what our structural grid would be. Now let's start to test different, in this case, it's mass timber, but it could equally be, volumetric modular. And you can start to say, well, okay, if we do this method, that grid isn't going to work for our building topology. Or, that embodied carbon is too high. What if we change certain aspects of that? And then, finally, you've got, well, once you've embedded all of that actual manufacturing logic into it, you can actually start to, generate fabrication models for this. So we can start to simulate how it's built. We can start to count how many parts there are. So it's, again, that convergence of the manufacturing, the GIS, all of that intelligence, bringing that into the design process. Now, you don't have to fabricate from this model, but it can provide sort of insight into when you're actually designing, is this what you want to do? So it's a different way of thinking about, I'm sure you would have run some sort of analyses, or you've seen, all of the different iterations that Autodesk did with, they had Ecotech, then they had, now they've got carbon analysis, and it seems to change every year or two.
With
But
Forma.
well, yeah, I mean, it's constantly evolving, but
Yeah.
we design it and then we analyze it and then we realize it's wrong. But then by the time, you don't really have time necessarily to come back and change that. So if we can compress that and get real-time analysis, then you've actually got a system in place that will give you better buildings, not necessarily just, better documentation.
I'm just curious, in what software was
This is all
what you're
Grasshopper
saying?
and Rhino. This is all
Grasshopper and Rhino. I see. Okay.
yeah.
Okay, folks, it's time to ask questions. If you've got some questions from Paul, I see we do have a few comments from Carlos saying, I would say interoperability between Revit and Inventor would have helped you to create that animation easier. I think referring to the mass timber animation you did earlier. Someone saying you couldn't pay me enough to make animation like that in Revit. And another comment about the what we're mentioning about what the new BIM should be. I see our group are so enamored with BIM platforms all day without critical thoughts into the actual process and outcome versus what's being marketed and sold.
Sorry, what was that comment?
I see our group so enamored with BIM platforms all day without critical thoughts into the actual process and outcome versus what's marketed and sold. And yeah, well, that could lead us to the conclusion. What are your hopes in terms of next generation of BIM or AEC tech software?
So I think it's a really exciting time. I think there's a lot of different explorations. I remember, I've got my opinion and version of 2.0. Someone like Martin Day at AEC Mag,
Yeah,
he's
I
got
had him last year.
He's got his version, and for some, it's about Revit in the cloud. Whether that's Snapshot or something else, but that's kind of what I guess they're wishing for. And I guess, in some ways that was the promise of Forma, but it hasn't quite, been realized. I actually think it's going to be very different to BIM, how we know it. In that I think for all of the smart technology solutions that we have, it's all centered around kind of a manual modeling process. So whether it's in the cloud or on the desktop, you're still individually placing toilets and walls and floors and things like that. And so I think, yes, we can create clash detection and we can do that smart, but it would actually be better if we just eliminated clashes through kind of automation and systematizing how we do things. So yeah, I think the future is about systems and algorithms, and really encoding the logic of how we do things.
And less manual modeling.
Yeah, definitely.
I feel that BIM is the awkward teenager phase in the evolution of software. So if you went from drawings to CAD to BIM, I feel things are still morphing. And if you zoom out, like the period that went to drawings to CAD to BIM, it's been quite short, right? And I feel it's still evolving relatively quickly, and especially in the last few years where so many emerging apps, and now you mix in AI into the mix. So I feel honestly it's a bit hard to predict exactly what it's going to be, but I know for
Yeah.
sure it's unlikely to be quite exactly as what we're doing now. With that said, some people are still using AutoCAD. So it's always a question of how fast are we actually going to move from one platform to the other.
There's I have an article in the works about the future of I guess, yeah, BIM and what that looks like. Um, and yeah, there's a great book I recently read is about the 12 technological forces that are going to shape the world. So
What's
these
the
are
name? What's the name of the book in the article?
12 technological forces to shape the world. But it's he's the editor of Wired magazine,
Oh yeah, okay.
so he's seen a fair bit of
Is it Kevin
uh,
Kelly or
yeah, I think it is.
okay?
I'd have to pull it up. But he kind of talks about these are trajectories. They're not a final destination, but there's certain trajectories that are um, in progress. So one of them, for example, is streaming. Okay, so um, you think about, okay, you've got Netflix, you've got Apple TV, you've got Spotify. We used to buy things, and now we borrow them, or we rent them, or we stream them. Okay, and it's happening everywhere, from cars to things like that. So you say, well, okay, what would that look like in terms of software? It's not about just a Revit license, but it's like, well, what if we were streaming algorithms, or we were streaming other knowledge of it? And so he talks about the first, I guess, era of change always tries to mimic the previous. So, if you're a Mac user, you've got the trash can, you had the legal notebook, right? Leather bound. I think it's called pseudomorphism. Steve Jobs was a
Yeah, well, if you think about it, all the icons on the phone, like the phone icon, it's like that
yeah,
old, the old phone model, and the same
yeah.
with the trash can and all of that, right?
And you talk to your kids, and you're like, well, hang up. Why is it called hang up? And it's like, well, the old phones, you used to actually have to hang them up, whatever. So that kind of first era, that sort of mimics. We have files and folders and desktops. They're all analogies with the physical world, right? And I think BIM has done that to an extent with CAD, in that we have sheets and documentation, whereas I think the next era will kind of move beyond that, and we'll actually just go, well, let's just forget CAD and doing a better version of CAD. What could it be? You know what's the best approach, rather than this is how we've done it, but slightly better.
Yeah, that reminds me one of the first firm I worked at, like the font that we're using in CAD. In fact, it was like that handwritten font, or like that mimic
Yeah,
like the old school way that architects used to write in the plan.
yeah,
So that that drives your point out. Hopefully, we're able to get rid of that at some point and evolve into the new thing.
yeah.
Uh,
It's
yeah, okay. I think that's good. That's gonna be it. So let me just mention a couple of things. But yeah, by the way, I found the book. I think it's The Inevitable Understanding the 12 Technological Forces That Will Shape Our Future by Kevin Kelly. I shown it
yes,
briefly
that's it.
on the screen. That's it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that guy. Okay. So give me a sec here. What do I have to say? Okay. So next episode of BIM Pure Live, it's going to be 2 weeks from now at 3 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be with Michael Kilkelly, returning to the show for the second time, talking about AI for Revit plugins. That should be fun. And give me a sec. Yeah, thank you to our sponsor, which is Guardian, a plugin for Revit to help you keep healthy Revit model. and be proactive with your BIM management. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, that's it, Paul. So, well, first, thanks for accepting the invitation. That was very interesting. I encourage everyone to read all your blog posts and articles. I've added all the links. It shouldn't be too hard to find. Any final words or things you wanted to mention?
You put me on the spot. No, I think that's it. I mean, it's been, great to be here. I think, the world needs more of these sort of conversations where, we talk about kind of what we do and how we do it, and even, the things that went wrong. I think that coming back to that honesty, I mean,
Yes.
that's the first step. So
Yeah. Honest
keep up the good work.
There you go. Okay, so thanks for there's a question from Raphael that I see. I would like to ask how Paul imagines data interoperability between different BIM software for data analysis for decision making. That's kind of a big question.
Okay. So I think it's going to look very different. There's obviously a lot of great work that's happening out there to synchronize data. Even startups like Speckle, and there's a lot that's happened. I spent far too many years looking at interoperability between different software, and I actually think the future is going to be quite different, in that Flux really started this many years ago, about transferring data, not files. And I think you can probably take that even further, where you can start to use algorithms and APIs to transfer information, as opposed to kind of models. So I think that's starting to happen. So I don't know. I don't know the exact answer. If I did, I'd probably be a rich man by now. But I think it's going to look quite different to how we currently do things.
Just Speckle is a good steps towards it. I had an episode a couple of years ago with Matteo from Speckle. I should do another one. Lots of change since then. All right, so that's going to be it. Thanks to everyone to tuning in live, and thanks to everyone watching the replay. And we'll see. I'll see all of you in 2 weeks. So thanks a lot, Paul.
Thanks, Nicholas. My pleasure.
All right. See you guys.